The current latest Apple TV that Apple offers this year, this little box that you see here, is actually pretty good. I like it so much that I got 2 Apple TVs, but as you can tell from the title of this video, this box is by no means perfect. In fact, in this video, I'm going to be talking about some of the drawbacks that the Apple TV has that Apple might look into working on in order to make sure that we can one-up this current model of the Apple TV to make sure that the next generation offers a current up to standard and much better user experience for you. The first problem that the Apple TV has is by no means small, and it's not one that's caused by hardware, because the Apple TV's hardware is pretty good, but it's one that's caused by TVOS, or the software that runs on the Apple TV, and in part it's one that's caused by Apple. And the reason I say this is because the Apple TV OS itself limits the amount of storage applications and games can utilize on the Apple TV. On other hardware that Apple sells, such as the iPhone, the iPad, and the Mac, you can see that they recently started to allow game emulators on the App Store, and many users have been wondering why the Apple TV users have been left out of this. This is because tvOS limits how much storage applications and games can use. So if you're using a game emulator on the Apple TV, you all of a sudden see files being deleted in the app, making the game or the file that you've downloaded unfunctional. On the current version of tvOS, the maximum size for a tvOS app bundle is actually limited to 4 gigs, and moreover, your app can only access about 500 kilobits of persistent storage that is local to the device. This means that even though the app bundle is 4 gigs on the Apple TV, the persistent storage that can be stored locally on the Apple TV is 500 kilobits, and once the app bundle access is no longer required, it will wipe out anything that's not in the persistent storage, meaning that your applications and games will probably lose data. And this is a big limitation that the Apple TV has that we are hoping to see resolved soon. And once Apple resolves this, there's no doubt that we're going to see more game emulators come to the Apple TV, and game developers that are now developing almost AAA games for the iPhone, for the Mac, and the iPad will be able to develop those games for the Apple TV. I have some good news, as we might get to see this change pretty soon, because with the latest tvOS 18 update that's currently in beta, it hasn't yet been released, Apple has made a change on the on-demand resource size limit when it comes to tvOS, and you can see here for versions earlier than tvOS 18, if you go down a little bit, you can see the in-use on-demand resources, which is the total size of the resources of the tags used by the app at any time, have been increased from 2 gigs to no limit, meaning that now you have the ability to use the in-use demand resources to access more data, unlike what was there before. But Apple still hasn't said anything or any changes when it comes to the persistent storage that's currently capped at about 500 kilobytes on the Apple TV. But this is something that could be changing pretty soon, since it's more of a software limitation and not a hardware limiting factor. One of the cool things that the Apple TV allows you to do is to be able to use your iPhone as a remote, but this should be able to allow more new features and changes for the Apple TV, such as having a web browser on the Apple TV like Safari. The reason I say this is because you are able to use your Apple TV with your iPhone like this, and so this doubles down as a trackpad, and having a browser on the Apple TV as one of the applications that it allows you to use would make more sense, because you can always browse the page by going up and down. We already have a VPN on the Apple TV, and not only that, if you don't want to use your iPhone, the new Apple TV 4K remote has this soft touch area that's pretty much like a trackpad on the Mac that allows you to be able to double tap it without pressing it to be able to do different functions, such as seeing timelines in the Apple TV application. So having a browser like Safari on the Apple TV that different users can be able to go to the App Store on the Apple TV and download would make a difference. And at the same time, keep in mind that on the Apple TV, when you are using the iPhone and you click search, the keyboard automatically pops up right right there. So if you want to search for something really quickly on the iPhone, like similar to typing on the browser, you can always do this, but instead of viewing it on the small screen, you are able to view it on the Apple TV, and getting Safari would be something that's neat and would take the user experience on the Apple TV to another level. If you look at Apple's device lineup or different hardwares, for example, when it comes to the iPhone, Apple sells a regular iPhone and a pro-rated iPhone. On the iPad, they sell regular iPads and they sell Pro iPads. On the Mac, I'm recording this on a MacBook Pro, but there's a regular MacBook Air or Mac Mini Mac that you can buy. So when it comes to the Apple TV, there's only a regular Apple TV, and the only difference has that the current lineup offers is storage and the HDMI output right here, and the data output port at the back of the Apple TV. But other than that, it's the same chip, and in terms of performance, it doesn't really affect the Apple TV. So one thing that would be cool to have on the Apple TV is maybe a pro-rated Apple TV that would probably be able to run more heavier applications and games, if this is the approach that Apple is taking. And maybe once the memory issue has been resolved, it would be cool to have an Apple TV that has at least an Apple Silicon M1 chip. If you look at the latest iPad Pro, it already has an Apple M4 chip that no other Mac has. So it wouldn't really hurt to have an Apple TV that's pro-rated or Apple TV 4K Pro. I doubt that Apple themselves would put like the latest M series chip like the Apple Silicon M4 Max or M4 Pro chip in an Apple TV for people to just watch TVs on this little device. But it would be cool to have at least maybe Apple M1 Pro, or even the M2 chip in an Apple TV to allow users more freedom to do more complex tasks on the Apple TV, and probably AAA rated games that we've seen Apple Silicon Max get that aren't available on the Apple TV. On the iPhone and iPad, as well as something that's been implemented partially on macOS, if you look at the different applications and elements of the home screen, when you go into like dark mode on your device, you can see how this changes. The background of the app icons change, the widgets change, and even third-party applications like Gmail changes to dark mode. But on the Apple TV, when you go into the settings right here and go to where it says general and activate the appearance and change it to dark mode like this, you can see when you go back to the home page, the applications don't really change. You still have them with the bright background, and if you are trying to limit the amount of light or dim everything down, this is not the best approach. So something that would be cool would be the ability to have dark applications and icons similarly to what we have on the iPhone, that carry over in dark mode when you turn your appearance on the Apple TV to the dark one. This way it really wouldn't be sort of an eyesore for users that are trying to get a dark themed Apple TV or home setup, and in the night it wouldn't be such an eyesore. Now, the current latest Apple TV that Apple offers has Wi-Fi 6 as the Wi-Fi standard, and you can see here the difference between Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E, and some devices have already started to get Wi-Fi 7. So when you compare the differences between Wi-Fi 6 that the Apple TV has and Wi-Fi 7 that's the latest standard, you can see that Wi-Fi 7 is almost 3 times the speed of Wi-Fi 6. And of course, Wi-Fi 7 being a later technology and standard, it will be able to give you that ultra low latency and enhanced connection on the Apple TV. And if Apple is going to be releasing a new Apple TV in 2024, like many sources are pointing to, then it will be good for it to have the latest Wi-Fi standard. Something that would be cool to have on the Apple TV is having the ability to customize this Apple TV button. Right now, if you press and hold it, it activates the control center. If you double tap it, it goes into multitasking mode. And if you tap it once like this, it opens up the Apple TV application. Now, it's kind of unfortunate because if you go into the settings right here and go into the apps and select the app settings, select the Apple TV, the only thing you are able to change really right here is the top shelf. You can change up next, or you can change what to watch. But what would be cool to have is having the ability to just tap this Apple TV button and having the Apple TV not open the Apple TV application, but rather open an app that you would have set. For example, you can set it to open an app like YouTube, or you can set it to open an app like Netflix. And that way, even though yes, it's an Apple TV, you still have the ability to choose and customize it to best fit your user experience and use the streaming service that you want. And that way, Apple won't sort of be secretly advertising Apple TV to different users through the Siri remote using the Apple TV button that you press, and it automatically takes you to the Apple TV and asks you to subscribe if you haven't yet done so. Now, on most Apple hardware and devices, if you want to check for a software update, you go into the settings, you go to general, and then you go to software update, and then you are able to update your iPhone, your Mac, your iPad, and other devices. But when it comes to the Apple TV, I don't know why Apple had to make it slightly different, and it doesn't make sense to me, because in order for you to update your Apple TV, you have to go into your settings, and instead of going to general and then software update, because general actually doesn't have a software update subsection, you have to go into your settings and then go all the way down to where it says system. And under system, that's where you are able to check for software update right there. And now you have the ability to check for a software update. So it would be cool to have this match the existing other devices such as the iPhone, the iPad, and the Mac, so that it's more uniform across devices that are in the Apple ecosystem. Another problem that the Apple TV has is applications that have moved or are no longer supported that it still retains. For example, if you go into or look for the iTunes movies on the Apple TV, you open it, it tells you that iTunes movies and your purchase have moved. You can buy or rent movies and find your purchase in the Apple TV app. So why do we still have the iTunes movies application if it's no longer supported on the latest version of Apple TVOS? And at the same time, you can see here when you go to TV shows iTunes right here, it tells you that TV shows and your purchases have moved. You can buy TV shows and find your purchases in the Apple TV app. And these two applications, I'm not sure why Apple continues to retain them. It's probably because some users have purchase history that's still retained in these apps. But for others like myself that have never bought anything on the iTunes store, it would be good to have these applications removed and replaced with others that can be used that are more functional, like having Safari on the Apple TV. Apple recently released and introduced a new HomePod mini device in a new color. You can see it right here. But one thing that's sort of deceiving and we hope to see improvements is when you look at the HomePod device itself, you can almost think it's wireless, and at the same time, if we visit Apple's home page right here, you can see under the HomePod section right here, it makes the HomePod devices seem like they are wireless, but it would be nice to have a HomePod mini and a HomePod device that's wireless, that has some sort of battery that allows you to place it wherever you want. And if you want to go out for a couple of hours and use your HomePod as a speaker or audio device, that would be something that's cool and appreciated for different Apple users like myself right here. Another way the Apple TV user experience, especially when it comes to audio, can be improved is what has been implemented in the latest macOS version. So on macOS right here on the Apple TV app, if you go to settings and then go to playback, you can see they've added a setting that allows allows you to select HDMI pass-through as your supported format for Dolby Atmos. And basically, if you have a supported audio device, you'll be able to get high bitrate lossless Dolby Atmos audio and other Dolby audio formats using HDMI pass-through when connected to a supported device. But with the latest Apple TVOS update and the latest Apple TV 4K, this isn't yet supported. It would be cool to have, since a lot of Apple TV users use the HDMI as a connection to other different devices as well. Now, if you're trying to buy any version of the Apple TV 4K in 2024, you can see that they both support HDMI 2.1. So the 64 gig storage model supports HDMI 2.1 and the 128 gig variant supports HDMI 2.1, and HDMI 2.1 allows you to get 4K 60 frames per second. But as you can see, besides the HDMI 2.1 on both models of the Apple TV, there's a little 3 figure that has been put there, and when you click on the little footnote, you can see that it's limited not to 4K 120 frames per second, but it's limited to 4K 60 frames per second HDR video output. When you turn on your Apple TV and go to the video and audio setting, under the format tab right here, the maximum refresh rate you have is 4K 60 HDR, and there's no support for 4K 120 FPS. Obviously, most modern TVs that are coming out, like the LG G4 and other OLED Samsung TVs that are coming out today, are having 4K 120 frames per second with HDMI 2.1 as a standard. So it would be cool to have, so that at least the Apple TV is in sync with the TV or the actual device that you are using to connect to your Apple TV, and that way the user experience will stay more consistent. Even though there isn't a lot of current content that you can use on the Apple TV for 4K 120 FPS, it would be cool to have your Apple TV match that frame rate that your TV outputs. If you stayed all the way to the end, one last thing that I want to talk about is the Apple TV Siri remote right here. This remote is really functional. It's very minimal and the buttons work. The touchpad is amazing and really sensitive. But if you have wired earphones like I have right here, it would be cool to have the USB-C connector of your headphones connect to your Apple TV. And then if you're watching something on the Apple TV or listening to music, it would be cool to have the audio transferred from the Apple TV to the Siri remote, and then the audio sent to your ears through these earpods that Apple releases, which are very cheap, and sometimes they used to come free in old iPhones. So these are probably earphones that a lot of people have around, and this is not something new. Older PlayStations and Xbox controllers used to have a port that would allow you to use a 3.5mm headphone jack and connect it to your controller and be able to transfer audio that way. And so that would be something cool to have on the Apple TV Siri remote, and yeah, you will be able to save costs. So those are some of the things that I feel can be implemented to improve the Apple TV 4K, to make sure that the next generation is one up to the current model that we have. Let me know what you would like to see implemented in the Apple TV, or what changes you want to see the Apple TV undergo to make you purchase an Apple TV if you don't have one. So that's about it for me. If you like this video, yeah, leave a like, comment down below your favorite features and what you want to see the Apple TV change, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.